All right, just for the sake of those of you who are joining from us in the future and watching a recorded video, my name is Stanley Liu, one of the general cardiologists. We're going to get started here. We have a mix in the audience of medical students, some residents, hospitalists, general internists, specialists, and some APPs as well. So I'm looking very forward to getting started. All right, we're going to cover four main objectives for today's talk. The first one, this is going to be a little weird and maybe not what you expected, but I'm going to focus on wellness. And I'm going to make the argument that if you don't care about your own wellness, there's no reason to even talk about money, because the whole point of this entire money talk is your wellness. Second, we're going to dive deep and shift gears and talk about the student loan space, particularly what you need to know currently at the end of 2022 related to public service loan forgiveness, refinancing, and how to come up with an intelligent student loan game. Next, we're going to zoom out again. And I want every one of you to make a promise to yourself that you are going to be working one day purely because you want to, and not because you have to. And we're going to talk about how you actually make this work. And then finally, I want to let everyone here be a little bit more savvy when dealing with the financial industry so you can avoid common pitfalls that doctors face. All right, so let's start with the first objective. And I'd like to start by asking you all three questions. First is why? What is your mission? As a human being, as a family member, as a clinician. Second, how? How are you going to do that? What is your strategy? And then third, what tactics are you actually going to do to put that strategy in motion? All right, so I am going to ask you a question right now. Why did you sacrifice the best years of your life, or to you medical students, why are you sacrificing the best years of your life, right? And spending so much money to become the clinician you are today? Why? What is the purpose of what you do? And I know this sounds hokey, but bear with me. Please take 20 seconds right now and write it down somewhere, jot it on your phone, and come up with a mission statement. Why are you doing what you do every day as part of your profession? You too, future watcher on video. All right, don't worry. I'm not going to ask anyone to raise their hands and share it. The point is not, the question I want to ask you to ask yourself is not how good is my answer. I want to ask yourself, how quickly did you come up with it? Were you able to come up with a cohesive statement in 20 seconds? Yeah. Okay, good. Because if you were not able to do that, you're in trouble. If you're not clear and honest about what kind of life and career you're striving for, you will lose yourself in the process, right? And we see this, right? We know colleagues who do this, where one day you wake up and you wonder, how did I get over here? Instead of charting a course of intentionality, you ended up being carried by the drift, and you end up somewhere different. And it's important to have a guiding compass to know where you're going. Now, my why for this year is different from my why from last year, and it is certainly different from when I was a medical student. It is normal for your why to change. But the point is, you got to be honest with yourself. What is your why? And you want to stay with it so that you do not veer off course and update it as you go, right? Now, this is an example of what my why is. And the point is not to brag here. This is so not me, right? This is not who I am. But this is what I'm trying to become. And everything I do, every decision I make in my profession is an aim to get closer to this ideal, right? And I hope you all have something that drives you like this. So let's shift from why to how. All right, once you know what you're doing this for, what your why is, how do you make this why actually a reality so that you love your life, right? So that you enjoy and you get a lot of satisfaction from both your personal and your professional life. Step one is you have to clearly understand your why, and you have to let it drive every single decision that you make, right? You guys up in the corner who are applying for fellowship right now, right? You're being asked, if you haven't already been asked, why do you want to be an endocrinologist? Why do you want to be a critical care pulmonologist, right? And these are questions that you have thought yourself, you've rehearsed. I asked everybody to be able to do that with the rest of your lives, right? And this is where money comes in. Like it or not, money will be part of the how, no matter what your why is. Because at the end of the day, financial realities will really determine whether your why will ever happen or whether it will stay a dream. And that brings us to the what. What specific objectives must you achieve this year in order to be on track for your strategy? In order to be on track for this year, what do you have to do this month? What do you have to do when you get your paycheck at the end of this week so that you are on track for that month, right? You buy a house. Are you getting that 15-year mortgage? Or are you getting that 30-year mortgage, right? Depends. Do you want the flexibility that 30-year mortgage offers? Or do you want the promise of being cash flow free in 15 years to be able to go part-time? It depends on what your why is, right? But that's how you want to think through this. And what I hope all of you do at the end of tonight is to make a plan to take charge of your financial reality so that it works for and not against your dream life. All right, so this talk, make no mistake, is about wellness. Yes, it's a money talk. You're here for the finances, right? But I'm on my soapbox right now, and I'm going to talk about wellness. All right, if you want to live your why, you need a strong financial game. And if you want a strong financial game, you need solid financial literacy. But make no mistake, if you don't know your why, and you have not thought through your how, the rest of this talk is a waste of time because you will never do the what that we're about to discuss. So know your why, understand it, and let it drive every decision you make, financial or non-financial. Let's talk about loans. All right, I am going to ask you, you should see the little the polling thing pop up here. And where did I see my? Is it showing up here for you guys? Perfect. Okay. All right. How much is your current student loan balance? You've never had loans. There have been zero. They're paid off, or any of those centiles of thousands. There we go. All right. Okay. So there we are. Okay. So this is what I usually see. So good. A third of you either have rich parents, you got good scholarships, or your FMGs, and that's great. And but we see some of you also have quite a bit of debt. Shira, is the screen still being recorded on Zoom? She's muted. I think we're okay here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move on here. So let's talk about student loan refinancing and public service loan forgiveness in 2022, 2023. Usually what we see, when I give these talks, usually I sort of see this bimodal distribution where a third of the audience, none of this matters. Take a second, if that's you, to give silent thanks and take a moment to sympathize with those who really have to deal with this, because as you can imagine, this is a huge damper on wellness. All right, so what we're going to talk about, I was going to talk about Biden administration student loan forgiveness program for reasons that'll become clear. I won't. We'll talk about public service loan forgiveness, and we'll talk about, should I refinance my loans? For those of you who are watching, the warranty period for this talk is already over because this changes so quickly. So this content is accurate as of today. So the Biden administration put out this student loan debt plan that I'm not even going to talk about because 6 days ago it got struck down in court, and the U.S. Department of Education is appealing. The short version of this is This is relevant if you happen to earn less than $125,000. Because if you do, then that is a case that you want to follow because it could be a big game changer for you. I will leave it there. I had to change these slides a few days ago, as you can imagine. That is very different from public service loan forgiveness, which is alive and well. So in case there's any confusion, public service loan forgiveness did not get struck down. That is still very alive and well. And we'll talk about what this entails. The promise of PSLF, which is what I'm going to call it, is that you work for a nonprofit organization. Usually we're talking about like the VA, a federal hospital, an academic center, or rural health, Indian services, that kind of thing. And you make 120 monthly on-time payments, meaning 10 years. And when you're done with that, and you have to do it under an income-driven repayment plan, after you're done with that, the balance is forgiven tax-free. Now, to qualify, you have to have a direct federal loan, which means it has to be directly held by the US Department of Education. Unfortunately, that means that if you went to medical school before 2010, when those loans were not the norm, like you had Stafford loans that were being held by a bank or something like that, those loans do not qualify. And that is a common area of confusion. Now, that sounds great, and it really is. It's a game changer. There are some downsides I want to make sure people know because a lot of people don't really understand the downsides. When you're in an income-driven repayment plan, let's say you're a resident and you're making 5 figures, that kind of thing, they will cap your monthly payments so that it's not, in theory, too unaffordable. And the downside of that is that you pay very little principal, meaning your loan balance is not really going down. And unpaid interest is accruing the whole time. Let's say in year 9, you change your mind about PSLF. Guess what? You owe all of it. And that is not something to take lightly. It also means that you may be incentivized to stay longer at a 501c3 job than you want to, right? And you have to be full-time. Let's say you want to go part-time in year 8. Guess what? You no longer qualify. And that is a big burden as well. I'm sure you have all heard about the nightmare stories of people trying to get approval for PSLF. And while there's a lot of confusion about that out there, the system has been working. People are getting forgiven, but you have to keep and confirm copies of every qualifying payment because you don't want to submit for forgiveness. And then they tell you, oh, sorry, we can't find confirmation of payment number 32, right? And then you have to search back from 7 years ago to find that one payment. And of course, this could be changed or canceled by Congress at any time. They created this and they could take it away. So that's PSLF, both the pros and the cons in a nutshell. Now let's talk about refinancing. Refinancing, for those who are unfamiliar, is the idea that a bank or some other company pays off your loan, buys up your debt, and then gives it back to you under new terms. The main reason people will do this is if they can offer a lower interest rate and you can save a lot of money. And that's the main benefit, right? You could potentially save thousands, if not tens of thousands in interest payment. You can also customize your loan term and your payments, right? Maybe you want to pay it off over 5 years to 20 years and you can and customize your payments. You can do it that way. And this is a very competitive market, right? And they will compete for your business. They will offer you cashback bonuses. And I actually know people who have refinanced multiple times to cash in on those bonuses. I'm not sure it's a great use of time, but hey, they made, maybe $1,000 here, that kind of thing. And that's what they decided to do. But that's actually something you can do, right? It's not like refinancing your home where you have to pay a lot of upfront and a big cost. Now, this all assumes you have decent credit and you can qualify for the best interest rate. If you happen to have some serious credit card issues or a poor credit score, forget about this because you're not going to get the best interest rate and you won't be able to maximize the benefits here. Now, refinancing sounds pretty good, right? Big downsides that I want to make sure everybody's aware of for refinancing. When you refinance, the Department of Education basically tells you you're dead to us. You burn that bridge, you no longer have a loan that is held or guaranteed by the federal government. You're on your own. It's you and the private sector. And that means you become ineligible for a lot of the perks that come with federal student loans, including the ability to defer payments, to have income-driven repayment plans, right? If you have a federal loan and suddenly your income goes down for whatever reason, your maximum payment is also going to go down too, right? You instantly become ineligible for PSLF, right? So pity those doctors who refinanced in February of 2020, right? Somebody thought it was a good idea. And they missed $0 payments for the next, how many years is it? Almost 3 years now, right? And you become ineligible for that CARES Act relief, which will expire at the end of next month. So for those of you who don't know, loan payments went to zero in March of 2020. They have been at zero. All of those months qualified for PSLF, but that's about to change in a couple of months, where loan payments will restart, and that's all going to change. Another big one that you may not think about is that federal loans, they come with death or disability forgiveness. Something happens, you're off the hook. Private loan, depending on the company, maybe not so much. Maybe your significant other, your parent, your kid is now in charge of paying off that $100,000 that you owe. And that is not a small thing to think about, right? To blow off. Now, if you have private non-federal loans, you don't have any of these perks anyway. Refinance away, get the best interest rate you can, right? These downsides are primarily if you hold federal student debt. And as of now, another huge downside. Last time I gave this talk, interest rates were really, really low, right, for ACP. That's not the case. We know that interest rates have sharply increased since early 2022, and the gap between what the federal government is charging you and what you might be able to get is narrowing. I have no idea what it's going to be in January 2023 when CARES Act relief expires, and those who are paying off debt have to make the call. Do you refinance now and lock in what you hope is a better interest rate, or do you take your chances? And this is a tough situation. So some of you might be thinking, then should I refinance my high interest federal loan, right? I'm holding a federal loan at 7% interest. Should I refinance it if I can get it at 4 or 5? Short answer, my personal opinion, is if you're still in training, looking at you residents, right? Probably not. And I'm going to explain why. The longer answer is a lot more complicated. We're going to dive into that. And there are two major factors to consider. One is something called your debt to income ratio at graduation, and the other is how likely you will qualify for PSLF. Let's talk about this first concept, because unless you've really been in the financial world, this may not come second nature to you. The debt to income ratio, and this is very simple math, is your student loan balance divided by your annual salary. All right, and for you students and residents, I'm talking about your salary at the time of graduation. Right. Let's say, for example, your student loan balance is $150,000 when you finish training. And when you're a fully fledged clinician, it's $150,000 a year. What's your debt to income ratio? Perfect. All right. You all got it, right? That's your debt to income ratio. So let's actually take a look and see what this looks like in real life, right? Let's say that's your situation. You have $150,000 in debt, your first salary coming out, no matter what, regardless of what you're doing. Let's just say it's $150,000, right? Let's say your interest rate is 5%, right? How much interest are you going to accrue that first year that you start repayment? Yeah, $7,500, right? And that's 5% times $150,000. And that means you have to pay off $7,500 that first year just to keep your balance even, right? Just to maintain a balance of $150,000 by the end of the year. Now, if you look at that money relative to your salary, what you see is that's 5% of your salary, right? You need to spend 5% of your salary just to stay even under these terms. Now, let's make these terms a little less nice. Let's say for whatever reason, you make $100,000 instead of $150,000. That means your debt to income ratio is now 1.5, right? Same interest rate. You're still going to owe the same $7,500 a year, but that's going to hurt, right? Instead of spending 5% of your salary, you're now spending 7.5% of your salary just to stay even though it's the same dollar amount. And let's say you owe more than that. Let's say you owe $200,000. Now you're going to owe $10,000 in interest, and that is going to be 10% of your gross salary just to stay even. So this ratio matters. It is not the amount. It's not how much you make. It's not how much you owe. It is the ratio. This is why the ratio matters. Let's say you want to be debt-free in 10 years with 5% interest. This is what the math works out to be. How much of your salary has to go to loans? And as you can see, as your debt to income ratio goes up, life becomes much, much harder. And my personal opinion is that life starts looking, PSLF starts looking pretty good if your expected debt to income ratio is greater than 2. So how might you weigh the options between two imperfect choices? If you're deciding between PSLF and refinancing, you might lean more on the refinancing side if you have a low debt to income ratio, right? If your debt to income ratio is less than 1, you're probably better off paying that off brute force. You're not tied down to any institution. You can go part-time, you can do whatever you want, and you'll probably pay less interest overall, right? If you know you're not going to do a 501(c), you know you're going to be in private practice, or if you haven't made many payments in your training, and it's going to be years before you qualify for PSLF. These are all things that would push you toward the refinancing side. On the other hand, if you know you're going to be in academics, right? You have a debt to income ratio greater than 2, and let's say you're a med peds cardiology critical care trained person, and when you finish your PGY9, right, and you have finished and you have already made 9 years of qualifying payments, you've got 1 year left. Oh my gosh, go do PSLF, right? Because then you've really maximized that benefit. Most people are going to fall somewhere in between, and this is one frame that you can use to make that decision. All right, so take home: should you refinance? If you have private loans that don't aren't going to qualify for any benefits anyway, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead and refinance if you can get a lower interest rate. And if you have direct federal loans, consider it only if you already know 100% sure you're not going for PSLF. And for residents and students, that means you have a job contract in hand, because you never know, right? And you don't want to burn that bridge unless you know you're not going to regret it. So that's loans in 2022, 2023. All right. All right, now let's talk about something happier. All right, let's talk about now committing to work purely one day because you want to and not because you have to, and how you can think about pulling that off regardless of what situation you're in right now. So what we're going to talk about is a concept called financial independence. Has anyone come across this concept before? Yeah, Dr. Sood, what's your understanding of financial independence?
I first heard that term FIRE,
Okay.
which I think stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early.
Okay.
I'm reading online on a website called Reddit. It got me thinking about this idea of being liberated from slavery, where you're generating income, but it's being spent on expenditures immediately.
Okay.
And you're kind of obligated to work forever.
Okay, so if I may paraphrase, Dr. Sood, just for I don't know how much of what you said picked up on the recording. What you said was you heard of FIRE, financial independence, retire early. The idea being is that you free yourself from your shackles of your job by not falling into the trap of spending everything that you earn so that you're dependent on your job, if I may, right? For the record, I'm not advocating every one of you retire in 5 years. We're talking about financial independence. But the idea is that, yeah, the basic idea is that your assets, meaning the money that you have, the stocks that you own, the real estate, whatever you got, it generates enough income to cover your living expenses. And what that means in plain English is that work is now financially optional. That's what that means in a nutshell. And usually when we're talking about this, or when you hear people talking about this, we're talking about retirement, right? Like you want to ideally get to that point when you retire, because your retirement will probably be a lot more comfortable. But the idea of FIRE, the retire early movement, is that, wait, who says you have to wait to your retirement age to be financially independent? It can happen before before retirement, and then you can, at least in theory, have more control over your life because you're not beholden to your paycheck. And so I prefer saying invest for financial independence instead of retirement, right? When I talk to residents, I talk to students, I start talking about retirement, their eyes just glaze over. They're worried about their first jobs, right? We're not talking about retirement. But I think everybody in this room wants to be independent and be able to work by choice, right? So let's take some cases here. And I'd like to show you 2 cases and ask you which one of these 2 people are going to be financially independent first. All right, the first one is a teacher. who, after taxes, brings home net income of $40,000 a year. The second is a doctor who's really killing it. And they're bringing in $400,000 a year post-tax. All right, now the teacher, pretty financially savvy, invests about $4,000 a year and then spends or lives off the rest, right? Doctor has a little bit more to work with, invests $40,000 a year and spends and lives off the rest. Let's just say for the sake of argument that they invest in the exact same things, they get the exact same returns. And remember, financial independence means that the annual income from your investments equal your annual expenses and work is optional, right? I am not going to try doing this poll again, but I'll give it one shot, and if it doesn't work, I'll just have people raise hands. All right, let's see if it can come up here. Who will reach financial independence sooner?
Why can't they live off 30,000 a year?
Absolutely. Why couldn't they suddenly switch to a teacher's lifestyle? I suppose it's theoretically possible. But for the sake of this exercise, we're just going to assume that they don't change anything, either one of them, right? All right. So what's going to end up happening is they reach financial independence at the same time. And for those of you, thank you for the few of you who were honest and answered B, that you had no idea. And that time is going to be about 51 years, assuming 5% investment returns after taxes and inflation. Now, if you finish, college with education and you finish at age 22, all right, retiring at 70, not the end of the world, right? But if you finish medical training in your mid 30s, you see the problem, right? Yeah. The residents are like, oh my gosh, that's not what I signed up for. I am going to take a quick pause here because I want to make sure that I just realized this. I have not been sharing this here. Sorry, give me 1 second. Okay. All right, so let's go through this. Let's go through and talk about why this is the case. All right. Here are the cases that we just presented, right? Let's look at the teacher. The teacher is investing $4,000 a year, which means they have to live a $36,000 a year lifestyle, right? Not easy, right? But that's what a lot of people, this is close to median salary in this country. That's what people are doing. And what that means is you need about $900,000 to be financially independent. Where do I get that number? A common rule of thumb is 25 times your annual expenses is sort of how much you need to amass before the interest or returns on that generated pays for itself, right? And so they need to amass about $900,000. Now, let's look at the teacher, right? They are rocking it. They're living a $360,000 lifestyle, right? Teachers going camping for summer vacation, right? They're flying first class to Paris, right? Different story. But what that means is to maintain that lifestyle, to your point, right, is if they want to keep that lifestyle, they need a whopping $9 million to be financially independent. So even though these are wildly different lifestyles, the doctor and the teacher are both going to feel equally strapped to their work and their paycheck and feel the same pressure. I want to cut back, but I can't. And that's what happens. And by the way, doesn't matter if you're a PA, you're a hospitalist, you're a spine surgeon, it does not matter. The same mindset is still there. Now, let's say we switch it up a little bit. Let's say the doctor invested more, right? Instead of investing $40,000, they invested $80,000 a year. All right, boo-hoo, they can only live a $320,000 lifestyle, right? Right, and their plastic surgeon neighbors are just shaking their heads when they look at them, right? This is a pretty rough cutback. All right, if you do the math, this leads to now you need to accumulate $8 million, which is still crazy, stupid rich, right? That's a lot of money. But if you look at this from the perspective of time, remember we said that the teacher needs 51 years? The physician just cut off 14 years, right? You can be financially independent at this ridiculous lifestyle in 37 years. You residents, is that cool with you? You guys can do that? 37 years? Still a bit much, man. I'm glad I didn't interview you guys. All right. All right. Please.
question if they're going plastic surgery training and somebody's.
Yes, and the time is different. I think the point that you're making is that the teacher has a head start, right? The teacher has a head start, and that is absolutely key here. And that's exactly the point I want to emphasize on this slide. Early in your career, it's not how much you save. It's what proportion of your salary that you save that matters, that you invest. This is how the math works. When you look at the time to financial independence, which is plotted on the x-axis and, excuse me, on the y-axis, versus how much is your savings rate. On the far left, right, over here, this is if you spend every penny you make, right? Your bank account is the same at the end of every paycheck because you spend it all, right? You've moved nowhere closer to financial independence and you will never be financially independent. On the far right? You live in your parents' basement, right? They're feeding you everything. You have no expenses at all. Why are you even working, right? You don't even need to, right? Because you're already independent, at least as long as you got that sweet setup. Most of us are somewhere in between. And the math works out that if you're a doctor or a clinician starting in your 30s, right? Later than the teacher, to your point, and you want to retire before age 70, you got to invest at least 20% of your gross income for financial independence. And if 37 years for you slackers is too long, right? You got to do even more than that. That is just how the math works out. And oftentimes I'll give this talk and people are like, oh, you're a cardiologist, what do you know, blah, blah, blah. But I've also given this talk to people who make a lot more than me. And they're like, oh, I don't know if I can do 20%, right? And don't get me wrong, it's a lot harder for the teacher to do this 20% than it is for a physician, right? And we all know how much different specialties pay and the difference there. But that is simply how the math works. So how do you actually invest if you have not done this before? Generally speaking, investing happens in kind of this is very, very high level, $30,000 view. On the far left, you could outsource this. You could have a financial advisor, a professional to do this for you and free your time to do more important things with your life. You often pay more for that, obviously, because that's a convenience. Far right, you can 100% DIY, do it all yourself. Takes a lot more time, more complicated, but you can probably save a ton of money by doing that. And then there are some options in between where you have some mutual funds that will do this automatically, or you have some robo-advisors. So with the last part of this talk, let's then talk about how to work with a financial advisor without being fleeced. All right, I'm going to skip the poll here and just do a quick show of hands. How many of you are seriously considering a major financial move based on what you've learned so far in this talk? Okay, all right, a few people. Okay, great. All right, so for those of you who answered true, you're probably not savvy enough to work with a financial advisor. And I'm sorry to say that. And I will explain to you why. Normally, when I give a talk at the University of Maryland, I follow the usual protocol where I give my disclosures up front. For this talk, I have intentionally moved my disclosures here. I have zero formal business, finance, or accounting training whatsoever. Nobody ever questioned my material or my qualifications at all. They're like, cool, you want to talk about money? We need to talk about money. Okay, cool, right? And if you make a terrible decision with your loans or your investments based on this, don't come crying to me. It doesn't affect me at all. I owe you nothing, right? Right. And the take-home point I want you to have here is that you should never take financial advice from anyone unless you know what's in it for them. All right. We all know physicians, PAs, we get paid different ways, right? If you work at a place where it's fee for service versus you work for a capitated system, you are incentivized to practice medicine differently. We all get that, right? It is no different for the financial industry. How they are compensated impacts the advice that they give you. And let's talk a little bit about how they get paid. But first, why should you keep listening to me? All right, let me tell you what's in it for me. All right, so I actually think this is fun. I don't know why, I'm just wired this way. I realized early on I was weird, but hey, it was helpful, right? And why I'm doing this is part of my why. I actually really don't want to see physicians making mistakes that I keep watching them make. And my hope is that the medical students and residents here don't make the same mistakes I see my colleagues doing, and I can share some of that knowledge. So I want that for my colleagues. And I have no conflicts of interest, at least for now. I have nothing to sell you. And so I'm not going to be, at the end of the talk, I'm not going to say, and if you like more, here's my book, right? I don't have that yet. So I'm gladly giving this talk for free. So take that in consideration when you're deciding whether you're going to take any action based on what we're talking about. All right, so let's talk about financial advisors. Anyone who sells financial products can call themselves an advisor, right? Not like being a doctor or being a PA or something like that. There are actually qualifications and diplomas involved, right? And one thing that we need to know is that we as a community, we're like big game trophy for unscrupulous advisors. And there's a few reasons for this. We eventually make solid income, but we have no idea how to manage it, right? Evidence, a lot of you are taking a Wednesday evening to come here and hang out with me, right? We're insecure about money and they know it, but we also have big egos, right? So and we assume they want to help us. This is a ripe combination of hey, is it Dr. Atkins? All right, Dr. Atkins, hey, I've got a great investment product that is perfect for you as somebody who went from hospice to primary care, because most people don't get this, but you are savvy enough to understand and change with the time. You are adaptable enough. I think this product is good for you, right? That is how they will get your trust. So beware of the cold call from a financial advisor. I'm looking at you, residents, right? Because you will be identified as a potentially profitable person. And I'll explain how they make money off of this, right? Please don't take away that I think all financial advisors are bad. I just want to explain that the incentives are involved are something that you need to understand. So let's talk about how they get paid, right? We understand how this works in medicine. Let's talk about how this works in the financial industry. One of the most common ways is commissions. And that means they sell you a product, they get a kickback. And the more product they sell you, the more the kickback. So they are incentivized to sell you the expensive products. And they make their money up front. So if it turns out to be the worst idea in the world for you, they already made their money, right? They don't get any penalty if they sold you something terrible. This is the most common one I see at your neighborhood brick and mortar bank, the advisors in the back. Usually these are commission-based salespeople. Another common one is something called assets under management, or AUM. And the idea is that the advisor helps manage your investments, and they get paid about a typical fee is maybe 1% off the top. And this is a little bit better, right? Because let's say you invest, $100,000 with an advisor, and next year it's $110,000, right? Hey, their commission just went up, or excuse me, their fee just went up, right? So they are incentivized to do well. They want you to do well because then they do well, right? If you lose money, their fee goes down too. So that all sounds pretty good, right? But let me ask you this. Let's say that you now go to that advisor and say, hey, should I pay off my student loan debt, or should I invest more with you? You see the problem, right? Yeah. Should I pay off my mortgage early, or should I invest more with you, right? Should I invest with you, or should I put more in my 401k? You can see the problem, right? So it does introduce a conflict of interest where they make more when you invest with them, and that can impact consciously or subconsciously the advice that they give you. The other questions you want to ask yourself, but let's say you stick with this advisor, that $100,000 goes into $1 million, right? Everybody's happy. That advisor is pretty happy, right? How much are they making? $10,000 a year now, right? Yep. Yeah, they got 20 clients, they make a doctor salary, right? That's how this works. And that's why they love hooking in the residents and getting their trust early, because they'll get those low fees early on, and eventually you pay for their kids' college. Not saying they're bad people, that's just how the money works, right? And so you got to ask yourself, is it worth paying someone $10,000 a year to manage $1 million when you actually make it, right? And the honest truth is, it's not much harder to manage $1 million than it is 100,000, right? And that's just the honest truth. But that is something to think about. Now, what you get for that service is outsourcing. You don't have to deal with this, right? These next two models, you don't have that luxury. You have to do this yourself. Model number 3 is a fee-based service. And the idea is that here, you pay an hourly fee for the service, right? You want to meet with this financial advisor for 2 hours, they charge you $300 an hour, pay them $600. And that fee is independent of anything you talk about. The problem is they can still make commissions off products they sell you, as opposed to fee only. A fee only advisor, where you pay them hourly fee for the service, it's independent of what they're telling you to do. And that is the only money the advisor makes. That is commonly thought of as the most conflict of interest free model. But unlike the AUM model, you got to do the work yourself. All right, so there are trade-offs here. But please do not confuse fee-based with fee only. I have had advisors try to give talks to my fellows and they try to slip this one past me. And I was able to catch it and cancel the talk before they did it, because I realized that they were still salespeople trying to take advantage of my trainees. So let's say you decide to hire a financial advisor. What should you ask? What are the in the know things you should say? First, you want to confirm in writing that they operate under a fiduciary standard for all their services. Fiduciary standard. That means they put your needs ahead of theirs, right? This is something I don't need to explain to you all. We do this every day for our patients, right? Sadly, this is not a requirement in the financial industry, right? There's something called a suitability standard, whereas as long as it's not financial malpractice, it's okay, right? But you want to ask for a fiduciary standard in writing. And what that actually means is that if you can show they did not act in your best interest, you can sue them. That's what that means, right? And so a really good financial advisor who's actually good, they will be willing to put this in writing. The other thing that you want to emphasize is that it's for all of their services. Some financial advisors will operate under a fiduciary standard for some things, but not others. For example, you want to invest with them, they will operate under a fiduciary standard, but then they'll try to sell you an insurance policy that really may not be the best thing for you, but makes them a big commission. So you got to make sure that it's for everything. Ideally, a few things to look out for. Somebody who has a little bit more than just sales training. They have a CFP, a certified financial planner, or a charter financial analyst. This, you got to take courses, you got to pass an exam. Like, you actually have to know something here. Ideally, your conversations about them are not about spreadsheets and models and numbers. It should be about whys, right? Why, W-H-Y, right? Your life goals. What do you want to do, right? What do you care about? Your values. If student loans are part of your financial game, they got to be up to date with this. And my gosh, it's hard to stay up to date with this, right? And ideally, they work with people in your career stage, in your demographic. So for example, if they understand that a resident will suddenly triple their income, from 1 year to the next, and how to manage that. It's a great question. Do they exist? The answer is yes. And there's actually, yeah, well, there is actually a niche, a huge online world out there where people market to people who understand all this. And they say like, hey, I work with physicians, I work with residents going to training. And so there actually is a niche market for this. My personal opinion is, even if you outsource everything to a financial advisor, nobody should care more about your money than you, because that is your responsibility. All right. So we've covered 4 objectives. Hopefully I've convinced you all to make wellness the sole focus of everything here. We've talked a little bit about where student loans stand today at the end of 2022. Hopefully you have all promised yourselves you will be working one day because you want to, not because you have to. And now you know how to talk like a pro the next time you meet someone in the financial industry. So any questions or thoughts? And because the polling is no.
Well, they will do well.
Yes.
It's not very true, because there is an advisor, and they give you the contract and you sign it. Even if you are not doing well, they will charge their service fees.
That's correct. That is correct. If there are service fees on top of the AUM model, but I was purely talking from the.
Just going down, market is going down.
Yes.
But they are charging 1.25%, which was in the agreement.
Yes.
You are not doing well, they are doing
Well,
well.
the point I'm making is that if your investments lose 20%, that 1.25% or that 1.25% or whatever they make is also less too. that is where those interests align, right? Like I go down, I'm taking you down with me, right? That kind of thing, right? So that's where that interest aligns to some degree. But your point is well taken, that of course, they're going to watch out and protect their own interests and have some financial backstops to their own practice. Absolutely. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, please, Dr. Griswold.
Finances for medical people. Do you consider the 20% save rate? Would you consider a mortgage part of the 20% save rate?
Yeah.
Is that set?
Okay, so the question is paying off a mortgage part of that 20% save rate? And I'm also going to ask the question, is paying off your student loans part of that save rate? The answer is no. And the reason it's no is because while doing that does increase your net worth, it is not amassing the investments that generate revenue that you need to eventually be financially independent, right? And that's where this gets tough, right? If you have a debt to income ratio of 2, right, and you make the 10th percentile of your salary, your specialty salary, please don't think that I am being unsympathetic here. 20% is tough. It's really hard. It's really hard. But that's the math. And that means you need to make choices, right? Like what is going to give? Do you work a little longer than you mean to, right? And what I want to do is, even if that's the case, you want to know that with your eyes open, not realize when you're 65 that, oh my gosh, I'm not even close, right? And plan accordingly. Yeah. So the 20% does not include debt payoff, unfortunately. Yes, question.
Savings proportion. Pretty curious if someone unresident and at some point I'll be an independent tax doctor and I'll make a lot more. But I don't imagine the things that my expenses will, at least in the short term, will probably, like the rate of thing. Multiply. I'm curious, psychologically, do people just spend a lot more, or is it?
Yeah.
I could save a lot more.
Do you hear that snickering in the room? Right. The question is hey, I live with a roommate right now. I'm a resident, right? And my income is going to go up. I'm going to be living the dream. All my financial worries will be over, right? Like, are you kidding me? I can't live on like a 6-figure salary. What are you talking about? What's wrong with these people here, right? And the funny thing is, psychology is funny, right? Everyone snickering that you hear around you is the attending who thought the same thing, and then they started easing into the lifestyle, right? Suddenly, like, hey, I can take that trip, or hey, I can get that nice car, right? And things happen. Now, to your point, though, that does not need to be your future, right? You can be conscious. Maybe you want to up your lifestyle game by 10%, right? Which for you would be huge, right? Right? Because you make what, $60,000 a year, right? Another year. Let me give you $6,000. Do anything you want with it. Wouldn't it be amazing, right? You feel like you're living like a king, right? But cap it there. Cap it at 10%. And resist the urge when all your friends are showing off their new cars, their new pools, and realize that you got yourself a plan. This is called the hedonic. The scientific term from this is hedonic adaptation, where you get used to your new lifestyle, you grow into it, and in just a few years, you could not imagine living the life that you currently live. That's what happens. Yeah. Is that fair for the attendings? Yeah. Yes.
I don't know about you all, but when I had kids, it was like having a goat and feeding it money. It was like, and you also, for work-life balance and family, you end up outsourcing stuff like the yard, the house sometimes. So, and then you might cut your hours. And it is, for I think a lot of us, it is at a time where you start to potentially make a little more money, and you're balancing because you are trying to save so much money for the future. And I do think it's hard. At the time I had loans, there were loan forgiveness programs that you had to be full-time. And again, when you think about, well, I don't know, when I have a kid, I might need to be less than full-time. There's not an easy answer to this, but I do think those years when you're finally out of training and making a little money, all of a sudden those expenses do go up. And it's not just because we're shutting off like parents.
Yeah.
How do you have the right choices?
Yeah, this is, you bring up a cruel irony, which is the time where saving the most would really pay off longest term is the time where you're least able to do it. And that is so cruel. But, and that is true. And then you start wondering what you're doing, right? Does it make sense to still be a hospitalist, or should I change to primary care? Does it make sense to work full time, or should I be part-time, right? And oh my gosh, I'm not going to be eligible for PSLF, right? That kind of thing. That's what ends up happening. And so what that means is you got to start with your why, right? You want to feed that goat money, right? I don't know why you went with goat, by the way. I thought that was weird. Right? You want to feed that goat money. If that's your priority, great, right? If not, is your priority to spend your weekends with your kids or moonlighting so you can save for their college, right? You can treat your family in very different ways. But you have to know what it is that's important. You can't have it all. But the good news for the residents, and there is good news. I don't want you to walk out here thinking you're all screwed, right? Many physicians or clinicians out there, they failed because they didn't learn this early enough. And when they realize it in their 50s, and they realize, oh my gosh, I'm on track to retire in my 80s, they can't cut back. They already bought the house. The kids are already, 10 and they're used to a certain lifestyle, right? The spouse will balk if they have to make sacrifices, that kind of thing. But if you start exercising the muscle early in your training, and you get used to that, it is much easier to hold back and then slowly loosen the purse strings than to go all out and then have to cut back, right? So if you are able to keep it slow, keep that hedonic adaptation in check while spending relentlessly on the things that truly matter, right? And ruthlessly cutting out the things that don't. That's how you do this. That's how you win the game. And eventually the money starts paying for itself and this becomes easier, right? But the tough thing is to make those hard choices, but you got to make them, or those choices will be made for you, whether you like it or not. Question, please.
There's that too. One is, it sounds like what you're saying is that if you're trying to save 20%, then with each paycheck, you're really trying to use up as much of your paycheck towards your savings. So kind of by extension, by your theory, it makes the most sense to take a 30-year loan when you're buying a house, because then your mortgage payment will be a less percentage of your monthly paycheck, which allow you the freedom to give more money than towards your savings.
Okay, so if I can paraphrase, your question was, all right, you just told me I got to save 20%. Where am I going to get the money to save 20%, right? Should I get a 30-year mortgage so my cash flow is a little bit better? Now I got a little bit more to do, right? Obviously, the downside is you pay a lot more on your mortgage, right? I am going to defer that question. And the reason is because your question is a what question, right? I don't know anything about your why, right? The answer is different depending on who you are and what's important to you. I came up with my own decision on what to do in that tree. And you got to make that decision too. And it will come down to, what do you want to prioritize if you can't have it all? Something's got to give, right? And what gives determines entirely on your why. So start with your why. Seriously, do some journaling, talk to your spouse, whatever, and really make that decision. Because that's how you come up with the right answer. This is not a math question. This is a values question. Yeah.
The next question, I don't know if that falls under the values or a math question, but I've also heard that someone told me that given the fact that the stock market typically gives you returns historically about 5% a year, that if whatever you're paying off, the interest rate is less than 5%, it's good to, take your time in paying that off, and which allows you to invest more in the stock market. So therefore, the 5% is going to be more than the 3% interest rate that you're working on.
Yeah.
Whereas if interest rate is like 7%, it's actually more financially savvy to pay off the 7% faster than it is to put the money to the stock market.
Okay, if I may, I'm going to paraphrase because you've clearly thought about this and there are people who have not thought about this. So I'm just going to paraphrase. I want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. You're talking about, all right, you have a pot of money. You can do two things. You can pay off debt. Let's say it's at 5%, or let's say it's at 3%, right? Or you can invest in the stock market, which historically, does about 5%. And so typically, so you should, in theory, it should make more sense to invest rather than pay off debt. And this is the classic invest versus pay off debt debate. And what I will first say is if you're doing either one of them, good, right? Because I don't want you to spend money, right? Or rack up your credit card debt, which I have to, let's preface it that. If you're doing one or the other, your net worth is increasing, all right? Now, which one to do? This is super tough because what the debt, paying off the debt gives you that investing in the stock market doesn't give you is a guarantee. You pay off a 3% debt, that is a guaranteed 3% return, right? It's like a negative bond, right? Like you're basically saving 3%, and you're gonna get 3% worth, no more, no less. Stock market, hey, welcome to 2022, right? Like it could change at any moment. There are historical averages. You have to know where you're at with uncertainty. And at the end of the day, are you really going to invest? Are you really going to pay off debt? Or are you going to end up spending the money on something else, right? You got to know where you are, right? There are a couple of things where I think the answer is clear. I will say, like, let's say you get a 401k match at work, right? That is 100% return. Oh yeah, you do that. That is maybe the one clear answer where I will say, I don't care if you have $200,000 in debt, get that match, right? That's 100% return. You can't make any, and it's guaranteed, right? That may be one exception to that rule. The further apart the interest rate difference, right? If you're the lower the interest rate on your debt, for example, then the investing side looks a lot more attractive, right? How big that difference should be so that you can, feel good about this, it's personal. What I tell people is, if you lie awake at night wondering if you made the wrong decision, you made the wrong decision, right? You do the one, it doesn't matter which one is mathematically right. You do the one that lets you sleep at night, right? Because, and if you're going to lie awake thinking, I should have invested in the stock market, right? or what if the stock market crashes? I couldn't pay off my debt, right? Like if you are one of those people, the answer is, that's the answer, right? Because at the end of the day, this is for you, right? The math matters to some degree. Yeah, so I would say the 401k match or 403b match, if you get one, then maybe that's the one black and white one where you investing makes sense, even if you have debt. Yeah. Yes, question. Ooh, yes. Yes.
The PSLF loan, the 10-year mark, when they forgive the loans, do you have to pay tax on that?
Yeah, the question is PSLF loan forgiveness taxable? The answer is no. No, not for PSLF. Now, there is a separate loan forgiveness program called income-based repayment, where if you make 20 years of payments, then you get forgiven. That is taxable, but that is different from PSLF. PSLF is not taxable, and it's a really important thing that you ask that, because that makes a huge difference. You don't want a huge $100,000 tax bomb or what, at the end of 10 years. Yep. All right.
None of that was true. It was pretty fun to listen to. Please join me in thanking Dr. Liu.
Thank you. All right. I just put a few takeaways here to walk out with final messages to take home. I'm happy to stick around for 5 minutes, answer a few questions. And I'm going to just quickly put some resources up that people always ask me, like, how do you start learning about this stuff? And I put a few disclaimers as well. Please feel free to contact me. Like I said, this is fun for me. So go from there. All right. Thank you all very much.
Yeah, absolutely.